All right, welcome to Chapter 2. So, understanding the difference between leadership and management. So, after going through Chapter 1, hopefully we've got a good foundational aspect of what leadership is, a quick overview of some of the previous theories that have been around for quite some while, and then kind of laid that foundation for leadership. Here we'll further add to that foundation a little bit as we start to get into what leadership and management looks like. For a long time, and still in some instances, we tend to lump them together, and that's a mistake. There are different skill sets, different types of positions in some organizations. Historically, though, some organizations lump a type of position together, or a formal position, that really needs both a leader and a manager inherently, and yet we have come to realize that that's really hard to do. It's tough to be a good manager and a good leader. When we talk about somebody who's able to do both, maybe the best CEOs or best head coaches or best sport executives, that takes time. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of practice to be good at both, to hone in both skill sets. And what we've seen with some organizations is now they're starting to separate positions a little bit. And so somebody who really needs to think about strategy and execution and numbers and all that, okay, well, that's a little bit more management-based, managerial-based, versus somebody who's a little bit more vision, putting people in the right place, trying to motivate folks, trying to garner support for a vision. Excuse me. That's much more leadership-based, so they need somebody who has those leader skills and leadership skills there. So just a quick overview. I've got forest misspelled here. There we go. How do we get out of the forest? Managers versus leader, the need for both. How do we get out of the forest? This is usually an activity that we do in class, in person. I've done it with teams and organizations that I work with and consult with as well. Is if we imagine we're just magically transported in the middle of a rainforest. We've got some certain supplies, we've got some water, we've got backpack with some clothing and tents and some machetes to get us out. So how are we getting out of the forest? Well, usually I've got half the class split up and they're following a manager, and then the other part of the class, they're following a leader. And then depending on the size of the class or size of the group, might have a third one who's following somebody who has both. And these are usually note cards, and there's a little prompt and everything that's written on them. Well, the manager usually, the best approaches that we tend to see is, okay, we'll get out of the forest working in shifts. So I'll have a group of people manning the machetes, so they're cutting down and clearing a trail for us, and we're going forward. Then we've got somebody who's carrying the supplies, and then we've got another shift of folks that are maybe taking it easy and they're resting, keeping an eye out for any potential danger. And after every couple hours, we'll switch. So group that was carrying the supplies, they'll handle the machetes. Group that was resting, they'll carry the supplies. Group that was carrying the machetes, they'll be the resting and eye watch group. Pretty effective. It's going to accomplish the goal. Then those with the leaders, they're going to take a step back before doing anything. And they're going to say, are we even going in the right direction? Let's look around. Let's get our bearings. Let's find out the vision that we need so that we're heading in the right direction, because for all we know, if we never turn around, we might realize that we're only 10 feet away from getting out of the forest in the other direction behind us. So that little activity usually helps us convey the differences between the two as well as the need for both. We can't just have one or the other and think we're all set. We need both. And if we can't do one skill set, then ideally we'll find somebody who has strengths that are our weaknesses and vice versa, and we can work together and have a well-rounded team of leaders, managers, and an overall team. So we'll see here just quick case study example, and this is kind of embodiment of that little example I just talked about as well. So we see some of the different aspects of leadership and management here. Just a quick overview of the objectives as well. Now, a historical perspective. We'll spend a little bit more time on here. Everything else, I think, once we get into it, is a little bit more, okay, this stuff, it's foundational, a little bit more of something that we probably have some experience with and can relate to. So we won't spend a whole lot of time with those, but I do want to make sure that we do acknowledge the differences in the history here. Management has tended to be defined by movements and moments in time. So key moments in history, really. Scientific management, that's emerged in the last while. We see human relations, we see organizational behavior, so we see these pockets of research being done and practice being done and consulting being done at certain points in history. Scientific management, that's really blown up as we've seen in the last 100+ years. Our society and history in the US and around the world really start to become industrialized. Human relations, realizing that we can't just lock people in a factory for 8-12 hours, don't give them any water, don't give them any food, don't give them any bathroom breaks. That's bad. we're going to run into issues. That's why we have HR offices nowadays. And then organizational behavior, and that's a broad scope. We've got a class in the program that covers that specifically, and that's a little bit more of a wider umbrella there. But just the inner workings, treating an organization as it's a living thing, along with the people in the organization as living things as well. So, and as I mentioned earlier, leadership and management, they're seen as the same thing early on. And we know now that's not the case. They can be similar, they can overlap, but that's why we tend to see now some of the issues that emerge with certain specific titles in organizations as well, and why certain people fail at certain titles and roles. They might be a great leader, but just not a good manager, or vice versa. How they overlap. We can think of it in a couple of different views here. Leadership is a higher form of management, dealing with the vision, dealing with kind of the big picture aspect. And leadership could also be argued as management done well. After all, if we're going to lead people, we kind of have to lead ourselves to a certain extent. We have to be able to manage ourselves. Time management's a big thing that gets thrown around a lot lately. And if we try to, embody some kind of time management with our team or with the people around us, but we can't do that ourselves, we're going to have a hard time leading. And that goes back to some of the power aspects of leadership from Chapter 1. The other view here that goes along with it is that leadership is an essential skill of managers. But again, this is where we start to see the issue of being a good manager does not always equate to good leadership. It takes extra time, it takes extra effort, development for those different skills. Not everybody is able to tackle the big vision and communicate and motivate and have that kind of charismatic communication with folks. Some people are a little bit more numbers oriented or don't have the people skills to talk to folks. So again, it takes time, and that's where we start to see some separation as well. But there is some overlap, and that's where we see, ideally, some of the better leaders are good managers, and hopefully a good manager is a good leader if we're on the right track. And this has given rise to what we call a transformational leader, and we'll dive a little bit more into that here shortly. And Burns in 1978 dubbed transformational leadership. He also coined transactional leadership around the same time. And it brings employees to a higher state of being. It really envelops them in the organizational goals while also helping them reach their potential to help the organization as well. And we can see some of the separation here. So some of the things that I've already talked about: weak management and strong leadership, strong management and weak leadership. Again, some of the outcomes that we see and why it's such a struggle and why it's so hard to identify folks that are really good at both. Here, this is a good resource just as far as kind of some of the differences basically between management and leadership in a table form. I tend to be a visual person, so I'll try to have some visual aids here throughout the semester. And we see, kind of different aspects here. So status quo versus change. Management regulates existing systems, whereas leadership tends to seek opportunities for change. And that right there, I think this first one really helps us embody the difference here beyond what we've already mentioned. Leaders are agents of change. They're engaged in change constantly. Management, though, tends to be, how can we be successful in the current state that we're in? It's a little bit more static. It's taking it what it is, takes what's in front of us for what it is without trying to wonder about any kind of change. So leaders are agents of change here. Here we offer a definition of management here. And so it's that rational assessment of the situation and systematic selection of goals and purposes. Again, very systematic based, strategy based, control oriented, how to get things done, when to get them done, what's the most efficient way to get them done. Leadership, it's that influence, it's that relationship. It's moving an organization or group of people towards a goal, forward, in line with the vision, and getting them motivated to buy in. And it's a process. So here helps break things down a little bit further. Relationship between managers and those they guide based on positional authority. So that's where we see a organizational hierarchy. Leadership's also involved in that relationship, but the hierarchy may not necessarily be quite as much of importance. Rather, it's getting into some of the nitty-gritty, learning somebody's name, getting their backstory, what motivates them. Do they have any ideas that could help the team? And that leads to leader-follower relationships that become formed, and then they work towards any kind of intended change, those intended purposes, and they have that mutually beneficial type of relationship here. Now, if we flip back to the manager side, it's a manager-subordinate relationship formed. You accomplish specific tasks and goals. Good job, well done. You do it really well, maybe get promoted, get a raise. They coordinate the activities that need to get done on a day-to-day basis and achieve some long-term goals based off the work that needs to be done. This helps kind of in the form of realizing the mission. So if we're familiar with mission and vision statements here, this kind of coordinates it for that. Human relations, this is one, again, where there's another key distinction here. Responsible for many HR concerns. So again, you got to create organizational charts, job descriptions, hiring the right people, all those things that if anybody has hired or fired anybody, you start to realize, like, why do we have to do all this stuff? Why do we have to go to HR and get this approved? And before, how come we can't just hire somebody off the street or collect resumes and pick the best one? Well, there's processes. We have to ensure there's no bias. We have to ensure that laws are being followed, all that kind of stuff. Leadership encourages that alignment with goal of linking various visions. And they seek somebody who not only would align with the organization or the group's goals, but also has their own. And then maybe offer something that the current group and the current leader doesn't have. So they can have a more well-rounded group. And lastly, the process here. So responsible for ensuring that benchmarks are made, that's management. Motivating people by satisfying that basic human need for achievement, belonging, that sense of community, the sense of, oh, I've got a family, or I've got a group, I've got a team. That's leadership. So when you boil these down, there's a lot of differences here. And not that one is wrong or right or better or worse. They're just different. And we need both in order to be successful in an organization.